All right, we are live, but not adjusted properly. So you might prefer if I cut off the top of my head, but it's a little hard for me to look at that way. So good morning, Lance Tarchioni and Adam Henniger here with you in the Nutrient Studios with our next episode of Ask the Agronomist. I'm going to pull that in just a little bit closer. My producer was about to tell me that I'm too far away. Probably still could get a little closer. You're all going, it's close enough. So, okay. All right. So we're experimenting with the board here today. So we've got a new tilt on the board to try to reduce some of the glare. I have gotten a darker marker. So do listen to your feedback. Whoa, that's dark.
That's going to be too dark.
Yeah, too dark there. We're
too dark.
Yeah. Okay. So we're trying to make things a little more so you can see. Now, if you're watching on your phone, I'm not sure I can help you because on a phone, all this stuff's going to be so small, it's going to be hard to see. But if you're on a laptop, desktop, iPad, something with a little bit bigger screen, the goal here is for you to be able to see the board when I'm using the board. And last episode, we had some comments that people really couldn't see anything I wrote on the board. So you just had to kind of listen to what I was talking about because you couldn't see what I was talking about. So we're actually going to revisit a few of the things that we talked about 2 weeks ago, but kind of go in a weather specific direction. I also want to spend some time talking about how easy it is for you to access field by field, day by day, any year you want, any month you want, weather data out of your climate account. And it's fun to play with that stuff. It's really neat. It's pretty easy to do, and sometimes the biggest difference between two farms is a weather event, and you have every weather event that happened on every field you've got for the past 30 years plus in your climate account at your fingertips, and you can if you know where to go and what buttons to click, you can pull it up, and it's fairly easy. So a couple of housekeeping things first. So remind you that we're coming up about a month away from the deadline to enter for Chasers. So get your climate account out, get your data cleaned up, get your data trued up, and then you can go in and start drawing your polygons, 10 acres, and find the highest yielding 10-acre polygon you can find in your best field. And that can be your entry for Yield Chasers. So get those in. I think December 10th, right, Adam?
Yep.
Is the date for that. Adam and I, we got our butt chewed enough that we remember that date now. So it used to be hard for me to remember the date, but you disappoint a certain cute young girl enough, and you'll remember that it's December 10th. So and then we'll have our banquet, and but get your entries in by December 10th. There'll be prizes, there'll be giveaways, there'll be a good steak, good meeting. Some good speakers, not just Cal and I. We're actually bringing in some real speakers, so it'll be a nice event. That'll be in early February, if I recall right. And I won't hazard a guess on what the date is for that. But the other thing, some housekeeping items. This is hot off the presses. Just signed the contract yesterday for our special guest host for the season-ending episode. Very proud to say we're going to continue the now 3-year tradition of ending the last episode of the season with Dr. Fred Below from University of Illinois. So Adam and I will be road tripping to Champaign and be in Irmal, which is Edward R. Murrell Research Laboratory. Is that
Edward R. Madigan?
Madigan, not Murrell. So wrong M. So anyway, Irmal is the acronym they call that building. I was on campus when that building was not even there, so I'm a little unfamiliar with it. But Adam spent a lot of time there, and that's where we'll be joining with Dr. Below. So it'll be a lot of fun, as it always is with Dr. Below, and really looking forward to that. So appreciate him greatly for agreeing to do that. We will be at a slightly different time, so we're going to start at 8:30 that morning. It'll be Thursday, December 12th, which is our regular date for that episode. We've got one more episode in between. So that'll be 2 episodes from now. So December 12th was the regularly scheduled date, but instead of our regular time at 7:30, we're going to start at 8:30, and I would expect that one to go more than an hour. So if you got time from 8:30 to 10-ish, to be at your computer in your office or on your phone, and be available to help us appreciate Dr. Belo and ask some questions and have a good time with us, that would be awesome. So again, that's coming up Thursday, December 12th, and that'll be our final episode of the season. We'll do our giveaway. We're going to do a Montezuma toolbox, which if you're familiar with those, they're really nice, kind of semi-portable. Once you get them full of tools, it take about 3 guys the size of me to make that toolbox portable, because it's a pretty good sized toolbox, but goes on like the back of a flatbed truck or in a service truck or in a pickup or what have you. And we're going to get, you won't get it right away, because after we find out who won it, we're going to have your farm name monogrammed on the toolbox. So that'll be our giveaway for this season, and looking forward to that. So I think we'll go ahead and start off with the list on the board behind me. And last episode, we spent a fair amount of time talking about things that impacted yield and things that caused yield variability. And I'll move out of the way of the list so you can kind of see it. And this list is in no particular order. I do not have these ranked in order of importance. They're just in the order that they came into my feeble mind as I was making the list. So anytime you're going to compare how one hybrid did to another or one field did to another, if you're going to compare hybrids, they really honestly ought to be in the same field. I know sometimes if you don't split planter, you don't split fields, and you've got whole fields of a hybrid, you're kind of forced into comparing different fields, but just recognize that that's a pretty inexact science from the get-go. And then when you start to factor in these variables, it becomes worse than an inexact science. It becomes junk science, with the amount of variability that some of these things are causing this year in corn yields. So obviously soil type and drainage is always critical, always important, always a big impactor on yield. Always it gets confounded with the weather. Dr. Belo's 7 wonders of the corn world, weather is number one. Well, the reason that soil type and drainage are so important is there's a strong interaction with the weather there. And if you've got a good soil, you can get through some less than perfect weather. If you've got a poorly drained soil and it's wet, and we're going to show you some not yield data, but climate data here in a bit, that there were a lot of farms this year that had 6+ inches of rain in April and 10+ inches of rain in July. And if you're getting 6+ inches of rain in a month, which is at least 50% more than normal. I mean, most of our high moisture months, so like July, I think is our highest moisture month on average, is like 4.5 inches of rainfall. June's about 4.5 inches. May's about 4. So most of our wet months on a 30-year average, you're around 4 to 5 inches of rainfall. So when you're getting 6+, that's about 50% more than normal, which is quite a bit more than normal, obviously. And if you're at 8+, you're 2x of normal. And we had some farms that had over 10 inches of rain in July, and there's honestly no good way to get 10 inches of rain in a month. That's just too much of a good thing. And I think you'll see some trends in this weather data that might cause some aha moments for you as you're, because there's a lot of comparisons being made. I've been taught over the years that we're not supposed to compare ourselves to other people, but it's hard not to do, and it's hard not to compare yourselves to other producers. And you hear about the tremendous yields that we had this year. And we did have tremendous yields. There were fields of corn that made an honest 300. There were fields of soybeans that made an honest 100. And that's no lie. That's FSA acres, cross the scales. There were crops that were that good. There were also fields of beans that didn't make 60, and fields of corn that barely made 200. And those type of yields are not awful, But compared to the ones you might have heard somebody talking about at the elevator, and you know how this works, nobody's talking at the elevator about the field that they were disappointed in. They're all talking about the one that was the best it's ever been. And so if you start comparing yourselves to the stories that you hear out there, that can be a little painful sometimes. So we talked a lot 2 weeks ago about planting date. Planting date's huge this year. I'm a big proponent of being patient with planting corn. I am not the guy that says, soil conditions are the only thing in the world that matters and everything else be damned. And if the soil's right on April 1st, you better have, your whole fleet of planters running around the clock. I don't necessarily believe that you have to do that. But that was absolutely the right thing to do this year because basically as planting dates got later, yields just went down a steady decline, both corn and soybeans. And this is a bit of an overstatement, but it holds pretty true. In a lot of areas, the best corn in May was about the same yield as the worst corn in April. So there was a pretty big delta between April and May, corn and soybeans both. I would say proportionately, the impact of planting date was probably greater on soybeans than it was on corn, which is normal. But the impact of planting date on corn was far more severe this year than normal. Typically, the last several years, mid-May corn has beaten all the April corn. And some of us had come to expect that to kind of be the norm. And I still think it is on average, it's probably more typical than early April corn being better. But this year, earlier the better was definitely the trend. Rainfall, we'll talk about that a lot here in a minute. Stand establishment, replanting, that obviously relates back to weather as well. That's why weather is the number one of the 7 wonders, because damn near everything else interacts with the weather. Hybrid, certainly always big. It's not bigger than some of these other things on the list. But if you end up with the right hybrid for the year in the right field, some magic happens. If you end up with the wrong hybrid for the year in the right field, that's pretty good corn, but maybe not as good as it could have been. And if you end up with the wrong hybrid in the wrong field for the year, that's when you're calling up Adam saying, what the hell is wrong with my corn? Fungicide was I think bigger than some people give it credit for. I was talking to a guy just yesterday on the phone who historically has been kind of a recalcitrant fungicide user. He can be talked into it, but he doesn't really like it. And even he at first he said he thought there was a little difference, and then he hem-hawed and he said, I don't know if it was any better. And then by the time we got done talking, even he said, he said the fungicide stuff was better. So as you get south down into Adams area and even further south down in the rest of Calaw's area, the advantage to fungicide was probably even greater than it was as you come north, because those guys actually had more tar spot than we did up here. But I would say a lot of cases there's pretty easy 20, 30 bushel advantage to fungicide this year. And as you went south, they even saw some advantages to some of the late R3, R4 applications in corn. We didn't necessarily see that up here. I did have a fascinating conversation with a grower that I love it when people call me with stories that back up what I say. And this guy called me to tell me that, hey, he accidentally applied way more Delaro Complete than the label says you're supposed to. It was a 14 ounce application because he got confused. There's a product he uses that 14 ounces is the rate. And so they had the right rate with the wrong product. And so that's actually 2 ounces higher than the full label rate of Delaro Complete. And that corn was amazing. And this guy has always been a believer in using full rates of fungicide. I am a believer in full rates of fungicide. I think in many cases, full rates will do more for you than multiple applications will. Sadly, there are years where you probably need full rates and multiple applications. A year like 2021 would fit into that category. We thankfully don't have those years very often, and we haven't had one of those years. Well, 2021 was the only one of those years we've ever had. But I definitely think, based on observations of growers and you may have seen this on your farm, when you're on the edge of a cornfield that borders up against your neighbor's cornfield and you both use fungicide and you probably overlapped on each other when you were making those applications, both of you have a strip along the edge of your fields that's about 40 bushel better than anything else out in the field. That observation happens time and time and time again. And that is a rate response to fungicide. So, we legally cannot go above 12 ounces of Delaro Complete and Delaro. Every product has a maximum labeled rate that you cannot exceed, even if you were willing to spend the money to do it. That's the most you can use in one application. But, we continue to see a benefit to fungicide, and we see a bigger benefit to full rates over the more standard rate. So the standard rate of Delaro and Delaro Complete's 8 ounces. For a long time, nobody ever used more than 8 ounces. They thought 8 ounces cost plenty as it is. I don't see any reason to use more than that. I'm not even sure I want to do it. Why would I use more than 8 ounces? And over the last few years, as tar spot has become kind of more of a concern and people have gotten more aggressive at experimenting with higher rates, we continue to see this anecdotal evidence, and there's some actual trial research to back this up, that putting on a high rate of fungicide at VT, still important to get the timing right. If you wait till brown silk, you've missed the sweet spot. But putting on a full rate of fungicide at that VT to R1 timing is a really, really, really strong program. Not saying that would always negate the need for a later application if we end up with some late bad tar spot. But I think in a lot of years, if you put on a full rate in that VT to R1 window, that's probably the last fungicide application you're going to make. And I think you'll see a bigger yield benefit out of that full rate at VT than you do the standard 8 ounce rate. But obviously it costs 50% more, and, it gets pretty darn expensive. I get that. I did a lot of 10 ounce this year at home, and I'm going to make fun of myself here a little bit. I put my farmer hat on too sometimes. I prepaid 12, but the weather wasn't the best, and I wasn't super optimistic on how awesome my crop was going to be. And 12 ounces was a lot of money, and even for a guy that works for the company that's selling the product. And so I got a little chintzy and I cut it back to 10. Probably should have left it at 12. Next year, I'm gonna try again to commit to using the full 12 ounce rate on my Delaro Complete on corn. So going down through the list some more. So nitrogen. So again, nitrogen relates to weather, and one of the things I'm going to talk about in this weather data that we're going to look at is, when did you have excessive wetness, and what stage of growth was your corn at when you had excessive wetness? So Adam and I did not talk about this ahead of time, and so it's always dangerous to ask the producer a question when you didn't tell him what answer you were looking for ahead of time. But when would be what 30-day period would the corn plant use more nitrogen than any other 30-day period in its life, Adam?
From V6, V7 to tassel.
So I'm going to say the 30 days prior to tassel.
Yeah, okay.
Would be the most nitrogen that corn plant's going to take up in any 30-day period in its life. Is that a fair statement?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
At first, it would actually be less, but the rate is the highest, right around V6, V7, but the amount would be greater, closer to tassel.
Right. So I think it's a fair, honest, accurate statement to make that if you see when the plant's starting to tassel and you back up 30 days from that, whatever day that is, that 30-day window, that's the most nitrogen your corn crop's going to need in any 30-day period. And I think one of the things, especially on a poorly drained field, or especially on a field that didn't have an abundance of nitrogen to begin with, or a field that, had water standing on it in April and might have lost some nitrogen, on our May planted corn, the 30 days prior to tassel, we got about 12 inches of rain in some cases. And I don't think that was good for setting up that crop to have the yield potential that some of the April corn had, that 30 days prior to tassel, it was going through a semi-dry June. And it got really wet right after tassel, whereas the later planted corn was too wet before tassel and after tassel to a certain extent. So I think you could have two fields of corn that went through the same adverse weather, but if those 2 fields of corn were at different growth stages due to different planting dates or due to different maturities, that excessive wetness and the potential for interfering with nitrogen uptake, it is going to have differential impacts on those 2 crops based on other variables. So we talked a lot about aphids 2 weeks ago. I'm sick and damn tired of aphids. My goal is to I got about 10 years ish left doing this, and my goal is to get through the rest of my career and never have to worry about aphids again. So we'll see if I'm successful in that. But obviously, if you had May planted corn, it had aphids in it. And if you had certain hybrids planted in May, they had most of the aphids in it. So there definitely are. First and foremost, there's a planting date difference. You can have the most, pick out your favorite aphid candy hybrid. I won't name any names here. Some of you believe I have all of the aphid candy hybrids. That is not true, but I do have some aphid candy hybrids. So you pick out the aphid candy hybrid of your choice. If you planted that thing before about May 2nd. So I don't think it actually had to be planted in April. I had one plot that got snuck in on May 3rd where an aphid candy hybrid won that plot. So we've been saying that the aphids didn't bother the April corn, which is true. But I really think it's basically that Mother's Day weekend and beyond where the aphids were really, really bad. Now, most of you did not have a planting window anywhere near the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th of May. So most of you didn't have an opportunity to test that. Most of you couldn't get back in the field until Mother's Day weekend. And by the time we were at that Mother's Day weekend window and later, that stuff was all pretty heavily infested with corn leaf aphids. So disease. So it was not a bad disease year. So we when we look at these rainfall amounts here in a minute, you'll think, well, why wasn't crown rot a problem? How can you have 6 inches of cold, wet rain in April and not have bad crown rot? You guys always tell me that, cold, wet springs is going to make crown rot. Well, cold, wet conditions can favor your root system getting infected with crown rot pathogens. But if you have a low stress grain fill period, they're not going to do a lot of damage to you. Where crown rot really gets fired up and gets bad is when that plant's going through stress and grain fill. And that early planted corn had minimal stress through grain fill. Now, the May planted corn was under a hell of a lot of stress during grain fill because it got so dry in August and September. We'll look at that in the data as well. But that stuff was planted late enough. It didn't have much crown rot in those roots. And so because the early planted corn had a low stress grain fill period, and because the late planted corn was planted late, we really had minimal impact from crown rot on any corn. I'm not saying there wasn't any crown rot, but it was pretty minimal this year, the impact that had on yield. In some years, that is the biggest factor that is impacting our yield. This year, crown rot was a non-issue. So if you're wondering, well, how's that corn that people planted, April 10th, how was it the best corn? Why wasn't it full of crown rot? Well, if we'd had a drought during grain fill on that corn, I think it would have been smoked by crown rot because there was crown rot in the root system, but we didn't have enough stress during grain fill to really make that disease, flare up, flex its muscles and kill those plants prematurely. So crown rot doesn't really hurt anything unless it kills the plant, prematurely. And if it kills the plant 12 hours prematurely or 2 days prematurely, that's not a big deal. It's when it's 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks prematurely that it becomes a huge deal. And we just did not have that ghosting. We did not have the amount of premature death that we've seen in previous years where crown rot was a really big deal. And I think that's due primarily to the low stress grain fill period that early planted corn had. On the disease topic as well, so tar spot gets talked about much, obviously. It looks like Adam's pulled up a picture he maybe wants me to show. Is this your nitrogen uptake curve?
Yeah, you're talking about.
It's
a lot of different.
It's not going to prove I'm wrong, is it?
No, it's
okay.
It's going to prove exactly what you said.
Oh, well, that's neat. Let's use that then.
I was just going to add to it that there's other nutrients influence at that same period of time as well.
So this is some of the work that Dr. Belo has done. Others have done this work as well, and there's nutrient uptake curves for every major nutrient, and it shows when that plant is using that nutrient through its life cycle. So they're just kind of interesting to look at. You probably can't see all of that on there, but this stuff is available online. It's fairly easy to get to. And it's kind of a good reminder, if you're doing a fertilizer program that maximizes the availability of a particular nutrient when the plant's looking for it, that's generally a good idea. So, these fall, the fall nitrogen applications that we're in love with, I mean, a lot of people pick on those. They're like, well, your corn plant doesn't need any nitrogen until May, June, and July. So why in the hell you put it on in October? Well, yeah, we're putting it on in October, but it's highly available to the plant in May, June, and July when it needs to be. So it's not necessarily an evil thing that we're putting it on in October and November, but that just doesn't make sense to some people. And when you have conditions where you have excessive amounts of rainfall, like we did this year, when you're getting 10 inches of rain in July, I guarantee you that's not good for nitrogen uptake. Because that soil is saturated, those roots are not functioning very well, and that plant is going to be a little bit starved for nitrogen if it's in a wet, saturated soil. As a matter of fact, a lot of times people think they've lost their nitrogen. People think that they need to side dress. People think they need to rescue the crop because it's all yellow and stunted and looks like hell. It's not because the nitrogen's gone. It's because the soil is so waterlogged and saturated, the plant just can't breathe. And if nitrogen's kind of a fickle thing, it gets into the plant through the water. So if the soil's too dry, your plant's going to be short on nitrogen because the nitrogen gets in with the water. And if your soil's too wet, the roots can't really function properly, so it's not getting enough uptake as well. So it's kind of a Goldilocks thing. You don't want to be too wet. You don't want to be too dry. You want just right in the middle that's good for mineralization. That's good for uptake. That's good for root health. That's good for everything. So just like everything in life, everything in moderation. So the last thing on my list is harvest timing. And we talked about this a lot 2 weeks ago too. You really got to be careful. And I get very frustrated with climate and Field View and Operation John Deere Operations Center and all the data programs that people are using. None of them take that into account when they give you these reports at the end of the year, what your best hybrid was or what your best fields were. And you just can't compare a field that you harvested September 10th at 26% to a field that you harvested, October 25th at 13%. Even if they're on similar soil, similar planting date, same damn hybrid, it's just night and day different. There is so much yield loss that occurs when corn gets too dry in the field. It's easy to lose 10 or 20 bushel of yield just in a difference in harvest moisture. So just recognize that, whatever that's not good. I bet we just crashed. We'll see here. It's wanting to do an update. So Jennifer, you can scold me. I didn't run it last night. So Adam will tell me here in a few minutes if I disappear from him. It looks like we're still going, but anyway, we'll keep our fingers crossed there. If it ever asked me if I want to do an update, that's like a kiss of death that it's gonna crash. So we'll see if we make it here. But anyway, just recognize that the optimal harvest moisture for corn's 20 to 25% ish for maximum yield, and we obviously can't get it all out of the field at that moisture. And people are trying to come up with strategies to how can I harvest more of my corn at the ideal harvest moisture. Some of you think that's crazy. My dad would be coming out of his chair to think that the ideal harvest moisture is 20 to 25% because he loves it when he doesn't have a gas bill. So his ideal harvest moisture is about 16.5 because that goes straight in the bin. So it depends on your perspective. It depends on your drying costs. It depends on your operation. But if we're just talking yield, the best yield is going to be achieved at a harvest moisture somewhere in the mid-20s. And, you just can't get through the acres fast enough typically to get, this year with the wide range of planting dates, some people came closer to being able to do it, because if you had corn planted April 10th and you had corn planted May 20th, which some of you did, there was a huge difference in development and when that crop was ready to harvest, and you could start on your early planted stuff and end on your late planted stuff and get more of the crop out of the field before it got down to 13%. But we had such a dry fall, such low humidity, so many hot, warm days. I mean, there were days during harvest that corn standing in the field was basically in a corn dryer because it had a 90-degree breeze blowing through the field, and it just dried down so fast. And part of what's driving that is our early planting. When you get corn that black layers in August, and it has the ability to stand in the field and dry down in late August and early September, you remember when you used to go, when you went back to college in late August to your non-air conditioned dorm, how awful the first, sometimes 3 to 4 weeks of school was because it was hotter than hell. We get a lot of infield drying on early planted corn that black layers in August. If you've got later planted corn that doesn't black layer until the 20th of October, let's say, it may not dry down that well in the field, depending on, what kind of fall we have. This fall, even October was good drying weather for the most part. So that list of factors is something, if you're going to compare farms, and you might be comparing farms to compare hybrids. So if you're going to compare anything, you got to keep this list of stuff in mind, and you got to be honest about things that are different. And if the difference is going to impact yield, well, then you can't really make that comparison. I mean, yeah, you can try to factor in some of these things and say, well, okay, I think aphids hurt me 40 bushel there, so if I magically added 40 bushel onto my late planted corn, then my late planted corn would have been as good as my early corn. But it's kind of hard to just arbitrarily do that. So what I did was I took 4 farms, and so three of these farms are in my operation. One of them's my brother-in-law's, one of them's mine, one of them is the research farm at Monmouth, and one of them is a random field that I don't even know who owns it, that I threw in my climate account in the Lincoln area, just so I could kind of keep tabs on the eastern side of my geography. So this first graph we're going to look at here is April, May, June, July, August, and September, and total for the growing season rainfall for those 4 farms. And the 4 farms are labeled London Mills, Raritan, Monmouth, which would just be the closest towns to where they are, and Lincoln. And you can see some similarities there. I mean, they were all excessively wet in April. They were all drier in May than they were in April, but still pretty wet in May. We kept getting drier into June. And if you remember back to June, we were afraid June was going to be, too dry. And it was kind of starting to feel a little bit like 23. Now, June wasn't near as dry this year as it was in 23. I mean, 23, until the derecho came through, I had a lot of farms that had 1700ths of rain in June prior to the derecho. I mean, we'd had almost no rain in June before June 29th, or was it 28th, 29th, whenever the derecho was. So, and then July, super wet. And then August, it basically, started to taper off significantly, which is normal. August is a dry month. We had more than normal. We had virtually normal plus August rainfall. So it wasn't a super dry August, but that's a little deceiving. We'll talk about why. And then September was extremely dry. And really most of the August rain came in early August. So I looked at the amount of rainfall that those farms got. So that London Mills farm, which would be where my house is, from August 16th to September 21st, so that's about 5 weeks, 5 weeks plus, that farm had a 1/2 inch of rain. And that is a time of year when you would like to have more than a half inch of rain, especially if you had late planted crops, which I did. Now, contrast that to the farm at Raritan. In that same window, had 1.2 inches. Well, actually, no, had a little more than that. It had one rainfall event on August 27th of 1.2 inches. That was a really good time to get 1.2 inches, especially if you had late planted stuff. The research farm at Monmouth had 1.3 inches in that same rain. And then the farm in Lincoln, I forgot to look at that for the farm in Lincoln, but I'm seeing a bit of a trend, especially in the May planted crops. If you happen to catch a decent rain in late August, nobody got anything in September. I mean, September was nearly desert conditions in September. But if you caught 1 inch plus of rain towards the end of August, that made a big difference in your soybeans, made a big difference in your late planted corn. Didn't really do anything for your early planted corn because it was already black layered by that time. So it was fine living off of the July and early August rainfall, which was plentiful. What the May corn needed and what the May beans needed was some late August and early September rainfall, which in most cases was non-existent. So if we look a little closer, see if I can figure out how to make Adam's iPad work. So if we look a little closer, there's the month of April on those 4 farms. All wet, all pretty similar. All of those farms had water standing on them at the end of April. It was a wet April, and if you planted in early April, that early planted stuff went through some. I mean, April was kind of awful. We really thought at the time that April was probably ruining the prospects of that crop, and as it turns out, that did not happen. So you move into May. So May drier than April. You can see the farm at Lincoln, which is the light blue, I think. Yep. A little bit more rain in May than the others, and the driest one would have been Monmouth, actually. But following a wet April, drying out in May was a blessing. So that's all good. Then we go into June. So June was a below average rainfall month. The highest total on there is 4 inches. And I think our average rainfall in June is about 4.5. So everybody was below average rainfall. A couple of those farms were pretty significantly below average. And there were some areas that were drier than these 4 farms. There were areas that had a lot less rain than that in June. And in June, everybody was thinking, oh man, here we go again. We're going back into, kind of a 23 pattern. And, and we kind of sort of did, because in 23, when the derecho went through, things got wet. This year we didn't have a derecho, but things still got wet. So here is July, and the bars look short, but notice the scale. Most of those farms had, 2 of the farms had over 10 inches, and notice 2 of the farms were significantly less. And I will submit to you that the 2 farms that got less rain in July had way better crops than the 2 farms that had 10 inches of rain in July. So if you're in an area that had 10 inches plus in July, you better have some well-drained soil. You better have some pretty kind weather conditions coming up in August. And you better have something good happening to kind of help that crop recover from the 10 or 12 inches of rain that it suffered through in July. July is a good month to be wet, but there is no such thing as a good month to get 10 plus inches of rain. And the best corn was raised in the region that had the driest July of these 4 farms. And the 2 farms that had the most rain in July actually had the poorest crops of any of them. Then we go into August, and we're getting a lot of variability here. So there's two factors that I see looking at this data that are really driving performance. If you had less rain in July and more rain in August, that was a really good thing. And I know a grower, very good grower, always raises some of the best crops in the area. He farms in that, kind of in that not too far from Lincoln area. Farms about 4,000 acres, 2,000 acres of corn, 2,000 acres of beans. I think he had 2,000 acres of corn that averaged about 270 something, and 2,000 acres of beans that averaged 85. And I know my rep that's over in the eastern part of my territory, Chris Bachman. He always feels guilty when he talks about yields that his customers are getting relative to what I had at home. He thinks I'm going to get suicidal or something when I'm comparing my yields to what's going on in his territory, and so he always feels bad, kind of sheepish. He doesn't really want me to hear how good some of the crops were over there, but I know how good they were, and I'm happy for you. A little bit envious, but I'm happy for you. So then let's look at September. So luckily, we are not making a living based on September rainfall because there's not much there, and the vast majority of that came from late September. So if you were counting on those early September Labor Day rains to make your full season late planted beans good, too bad. Didn't get any of those, and September was dry across the board. So as you look at through that data, the two things that stand out to me is if you happen to get less rain in July, that was good. Usually that's not good. Usually we're happy if you get more rain in July, because if we're having average July rainfall of 4 inches or 5 inches, getting 6 or 7 is probably better. But when the average July rainfall this year in Illinois was probably 6, 7, 8 inches, you'd rather be on the low side of average than on the high side of average. And then August was critically important for the planted corn and for the May planted beans, and it was not crops either, but it was a lot more important to the May planted crops. And August got really dry. Most of the rainfall that we got in August came in the first 15 days of August. It was so if you look at that window from like July 1st to August 15th or August 10th, maybe, there was probably 12, 13, 14 inches of rain for a lot of people in that 6-week window there, and then basically nothing for the rest of the growing season. And you can't store up a season's worth of rain. You got to have timely rains. Timely rains are way better than if you look at the totals. This is interesting too. Forgot I had this one. So look at how similar in total rainfall for the season. Have I got the right one? Nope. It flipped on me. Look at how similar those 4 farms are for their total seasonal rainfall. They're all well above normal, but they're very similar. So it's not the amount of rain you got in a year that's driving things this year. It's how much you got when that's driving things this year. And that's usually the case. So that's what I really like. And I pulled all that data out of Climate. I did that last night, sitting in my office in about 30 minutes. Took me longer to, actually it didn't take me 30 minutes to pull the data. Took me longer to make the graphs than it did to pull the data. And when I pulled it out, it looked like this. But and if I didn't work with Chris Carlisle, I'd probably show things like this. But when you work with Chris long enough, and you look like a doofus enough, you kind of think, well, maybe I ought to care a little bit more about the way I'm presenting my information. So I didn't show you this until just there. I put those pretty graphs together. I was proud of myself. I figured out how to do that. So anyway, you can do that too. So let's walk through that a little bit. Adam, if you wouldn't mind, pull up climate.com on your, the easy place to do this is at your computer. You can do it from your phone, but it's going to drive you crazy because everything's too small. So get in your office, get on an actual real computer, go to climate.com, and we're going to show you how to get there. And the tricky part is
to log in when it loads.
Okay. The tricky part is to find. So pardon me while I log in. So while I'm logging in, I'll see if I can type and talk at the same time. I will remind everybody, we love your questions. And just because we haven't asked for your questions yet doesn't mean we don't love them. So that's my bad for not reminding you that we like your questions. So if you feel that the content of today's program has just been awful and we have not talked about a single damn thing that you're interested in, now's your opportunity to ask the question about what you're interested in. And Adam can watch and see if anybody asks a question while I'm logging into Climate here, because this is not very good TV right now watching me do this. Log in. Okay. So when you log in, you'll come into a screen that looks like that. If you've got a FieldView account and you've never seen that screen before, shame on you. Go to View My Operation, and it's going to pull up all the fields that I've got in there down the left-hand side or right-hand side, whichever side that is. I am going to pick, big field, which is where my house is. And it's going to pull up information for that field. And this is where it gets a little tricky to find this information. So in this scroll bar over here on the side is all kinds of stuff that you can scroll through. So there's your yield information. This one is a poor example because it's right there on top where it's easy to find. Sometimes you got to scroll down through that to get to this little tab right here that says weather. Can you see that tab that says weather? That's what you need to find. So you click on the weather tab. I was showing you one of my crappy fields of beans there. If you saw that yellow and red, that's the kind of yield I had. Okay, so when you hit weather, then you're going to get this screen. And you'll see these two tabs over here that says, what's it say? Past weather and weather forecast. If you want to look back, which one do you think you need to pick? Probably need to pick the past weather. So we're going to pick the past weather tab. And when you pick past weather, you start seeing graphs and tables like that. And there's these two date boxes up here that is start date and end date. You see that? So you can put any date you want in the start date, and you can put any date you want in the end date up to yesterday. You can't get the future rainfall out of this. You can only get what's in there. So you can put down, like if you want to drill into a month, you can put down January, or let's say you want to look at July. So if you want to see what rainfall events that I get in July, let's just do this just for fun. So I'm going to pick July. Sometimes it's a little finicky here. I don't actually do this on an iPad. I do it on my desktop, and there we go. Now we're getting somewhere. So let's try July 1, 2024. I couldn't get the calendar to work, so I'm just going to tap it in there. And then we're going to go to July. Was there 31 days in July?
I think so, yeah.
They don't teach that song anymore that my parents learned about the. I don't know how it goes.
Days. Yeah.
It's just something about November, and so I don't know. It's just my dad can he might not know what he did yesterday, but he still knows that song. Okay, cool. So now I've typed in 1 month. So that graph that you see there now is 1 month, the month of July, for the field that wraps around my house. And the other thing you can do is you can actually come in here with your little cursor here, and you can drag it along, and it will show you what the rainfall events were. And you can actually see how much rain you got in each event. You can see how many rainfall events you had. You can see how much rain you got in each one. You can see what your monthly total was. You can see what your daily total was. It's all in there. And I think there's a lot of times that you see something a little bit perplexing in your yield, in the performance of a field or in the performance of a hybrid in a field. And it's probably the weather that's making something look perplexing. And if you actually looked at the weather data that is at your fingertips, you would find that, oh, okay, it kind of makes sense, I guess, based on the weather that field had. And I know some of you are maybe coming out of your chairs going, oh, that weather data's crap. It never matches my rain gauge. It's because your rain gauge is wrong. How much of your field does your rain gauge measure? This much. And that's assuming it's not, behind your house or under a tree. Even if you're getting good data on, a square inch of area, which is what's falling in the rain gauge, that's never going to match what FieldView says your farm had for rain. Because remember, what's in your FieldView account or what's in your climate account is a field average for the field boundary that you have entered into your account. And it's not right either, but it's probably closer than your rain gauge to what the actual average rainfall of your field had. Because if you had 10 rain gauges in that field, you'd get 10 different rainfall amounts in 10 rain gauges. So rainfall is extremely variable. We've done some research on this, and it's crazy. If you want to test this sometime, put a rain gauge out at each corner of a rectangular 80 and record how often there's an inch plus difference in rainfall from the lowest amount to the highest amount on 4 rain gauges on 4 corners of a flat square 80 with no trees around it. And it will give you a little bit of perspective as to why, I haven't owned a rain gauge in, I don't know, when FieldView became a thing. I haven't had a rain gauge in years. I tease Kyle a little bit because he's smarter than me, but he's still using a rain gauge, and I don't quite get that. But anyway, all this information is in there. It's in there for every growing season you've ever farmed. It's in there for let's say you've only had climate for 5 years. Doesn't matter. 30 years ago was in there. If you want to go back for fun and see how horrible 1983 was, you can do that. If you want to see how horrible 1988 was, you can do that. If you want to see how horrible 2012 was, you can do that. You can go back and look at all these years, and you can waste weeks in your office this winter pouring through this old weather data if you want to. You can compare each year to a 15-year average. You compare to a 30-year average. You can compare to several different metrics. So it's a really nice tool. It's part of the free subscription, basically. You don't have to have really any of the important pieces of climate to have access to that. So it's there for the consuming. So take advantage of that. While we're talking about yield a little bit, I'll touch on a little bit on fall fertilizer. So there's been some talk, a lot of talk this year about how, input prices have not gone down generally. Some of them have even gone up, and people are kind of struggling with that. And one thing you can do that I'm a big proponent of, if you want to get a little more efficient with your fertilizer and try to stretch your fertilizer dollar a little bit, quit putting on blanket applications of fertilizer and use your yield data to help guide you with your fertilizer applications. Soil testing is still important. So what I do on my farm is I take my soil test data, I figure up what I want to apply based on soil test data. Then I overlay the yield data on that, and I apply removal. Or if I'm trying to cut back, which sometimes people need to cut back, if you're going to put on 75% of removal, well, you can still use your yield data. And you can apply 100% of removal. If you want to try to build up some, you can put on 125% of removal. If you're feeling aggressive, you can put on straight removal, whatever you want to do. But if a part of your field just raised 300 bushel corn and another part of your field just raised 180 bushel corn, they don't need the same amount of fertilizer. And if you keep puking the same amount of fertilizer on the part of the field that never raises anything, it's never going to be as good as the good part of the field. It's likely not soil fertility that's holding that bad spot back. It's the soil. And you can modify the fertility of the soil. You can modify the pH of the soil. You can modify the drainage of the soil, but you can't really change the soil that God gave you. And let's face it, he wasn't as kind to some of us as he was to others. So some of this ground just is never going to produce what the other, the good spots are. And so it doesn't need to be fertilized the same way. And so, yeah, it's a little more work. You got to have your yield data. You got to get your yield data to your fertilizer dealer. They got to make some maps, some spread maps, and use some variable rate technology. And yeah, it's easier to just do it the old fashioned way, but it's not as agronomically sound. And oftentimes you'll spend more money doing it the old fashioned way than you would if you would take advantage of your yield data, utilize the technology, and make those applications based on a combination of your soil tests. And, and I don't mind if you've got a spot that's got a P1 of, 75, it's okay to make a withdrawal from the bank on those high testing parts of your field. I mean, you can, if you've got really good soil tests, you can pull back a little bit without probably sacrificing any yield. You have to recognize that if you pull back enough, long enough, you're no longer going to have those good soil tests because you are mining your soil. But if your soil's got 50% more nutrient in it, which is the case with a lot of fields with phosphorus, there probably is an abundance of phosphorus in quite a few of our soils. Not true with potassium. So I would challenge you, if you're going to cut back on phosphorus this year, every dollar you don't spend on phosphorus, I'd spend it on potash. It's a good buy, relatively speaking, and that is the nutrient after sulfur. So what nutrients do I get tired of looking at deficiency symptoms on? So number one is sulfur. Number two is potassium. A distant third, and I'll do this. A distant third would be nitrogen. And then a distant fourth would be phosphorus. I mean, it's pretty rare that I see a phosphorus deficiency. Now, Dr. Belo's done some work at Illinois on some soils that test pretty good in phosphorus, and he sees this is his banding work. Most of you are not banding, but when he's banding, he is seeing a response to phosphorus, especially in soybeans, uniquely enough, to banded phosphorus. So Dr. Belo would say there is a possibility that even if you've got good soil tests, if you don't put fertilizer on, it could negatively impact your yield, even if your soil test says you don't need fertilizer. So just keep that in mind as well. And then one last reminder: we're getting tired of me beating the fall burn down drum, but we are still in prime season for fall burn down. Matter of fact, if you think like me, we're just getting into prime season for fall burn down. Now my retail applicator friends want the fall burn down season to start, like the day after you harvest a field. That window is wider depending on what products you're using. If you're going to go really early, you probably need something with some residual protection. If you're willing to go from now till Christmas, you probably don't need the residual at all. And even in those early applications, the most important thing of a fall burn down, please remember this, is to kill everything that's there the day that you spray. If you do not kill everything that's there the day that you spray, your residual is not going to work, because the stuff that you didn't kill that was there the day that you sprayed is going to continue to grow, and it's going to make it look like your residual failed when actually what failed was you didn't get everything that was there the day that you sprayed. But we've had some moisture, the residue has kind of melted down, those weeds have been able to grow a little bit. You're probably going to get better coverage on them. They're all clean and fresh and got the dust washed off of them. And it would be really good timing, from here till, whenever winter truly gets here, to address your fall burn down. And if you go out in a field that was a carpet of whatever this spring, was just solid green, solid purple, solid whatever it was, that ground is just green with itty bitty little winter annual weeds they're already up. And you can kill those things super easy now. And if you spray them now, they won't even be there in the spring. And that field it'll plant nice, it will till nice. So fall burn down isn't just for no-tillers. It's the no-till fields that typically get really rank with winter annual weeds. So sometimes people that do tillage don't need to do a fall burn down, because if you've been doing fall tillage, you probably don't have a lot of winter annual weeds. But if you've been in a spring tillage only, or the only tillage you're doing in the fall is a vertical till pass, you might need a fall burn down too, even if you're a tillage guy. So that's we get proud by the episode. I'll tell you this. I promise you, by the episode with Dr. Belo in Champaign on December 12th, I probably won't be encouraging you to get your fall burn down done, because you should have already had it done by then. So I will get off my fall burn down soapbox. We've had 0 questions today. I think, Adam. That always scares me. When I've got no questions, I think that means I have no interest in what I'm talking about. So anyway, thank you for your time, and we'll be back with you in 2 weeks. What is 2 weeks, Adam? 28th. So 28th of November. Little post Thanksgiving episode, and then the one after that will be with Dr. Belo in Champaign. So two more episodes. So again, a reminder for the season ending giveaway. How do you get eligible to win this nice toolbox we're going to give away? You have to ask questions on Ask the Agronomist. So,
actually, Lance, the 28th is Thanksgiving Day.
So we might have to make a change there.
Yeah, then. I was going to say, I just realized that.
Okay. Well, all right. Well, stay tuned. I don't know if we'll be back with you before we're with Dr. Belo or not, because we might just say that'll be the last episode for the season and skip, because we're not gonna bother you on Thanksgiving. Unless you're like me, if you're trying to hide from your family, maybe you'd like to be on an episode of Ask the Agronomist with me. But I'm not going to ask Adam to come help me on Thanksgiving. So
we'll be there, Lance.
we'll get an announcement out on that here fairly soon, whether we're going to move that ahead or move that back. And I guess my gut feel kind of right now is we'll probably just skip that episode, because if we move it ahead, it's too close to this one. If we move it back, it's too close to the year-end one. And you're not going to miss me if I'm gone for a couple weeks. So I think we'll just make that executive decision right here and now. The next episode will be our season-ending episode. We'll give you Thanksgiving off, and we'll be back with you on December 12th with Dr. Belo, live from Irma Laboratories in, is that in Champaign or Urbana? That's probably Urbana, isn't it?
Urbana.
That's Urbana. Yeah. Poor Urbana. It almost never gets mentioned. It's always Champaign. So
that's why it's technically University of Illinois and Urbana.
Yeah, they got top billing, but still never get mentioned. So, all right. Well, thanks again, and we'll see you in 4 weeks, as it turns out, on December 12th. So everybody stay safe. I'm glad you looked that up.